All right, all right. Let's see what we've got here. Look at all you guys running up there dodging. You know, you can do that at a break too. It works just as well at a break to walk up and go, I'm going to stand in front of Randy and put my little USB drive here. So if you need to grab your thing, well, okay, that came out wrong. If you need to get your USB flash drive, you can walk up during a break and do it. You don't have to, you know, just randomly walk up while I'm talking to everybody. So yeah, that made the YouTube live stream. Right on, everybody. Yeah. Okay, so anyhow, don't forget again, you know, there's a few of you, especially on the back half of the classroom, that have issues with turning off your computers before you leave. Please remember, I do walk through and check, and I kind of mentally keep a track of who is screwing with me by leaving their computers on. I go, argh. So anyway, the other thing is we do have some folks who are not feeling awesome, and hope that they're going to feel well or feel better. So you know, they're the folks who are watching now live. I apologize in advance for how this is going to sound to you guys, but. And then also, the film festival is coming. We do have an educational, filmmaker education session that is, I will probably have some comp tickets to hand you guys, depending on how many of you want to go. One of the guys is up for 2 Academy Awards for post-production audio in documentary film this year. So this Sunday, we'll find out if either of his films win an Academy Award. And it has an Academy Award winning production sound mixer he won an Oscar for Titanic. He's going to be on this panel as well. So that is Saturday at the festival, the film festival. So Documentary Film Festival coming up March 23rd through the 26th. sebdocs.org. I just launched the website this weekend. Public sales for tickets is coming up this week. Right now, we limit ticket sales to my members and supporters and people who have thrown money at me in the past. And so I go, here you go. Have some exclusive access. All right. So that is what's up this week. Don't forget to turn your computers off. I remember everything. Okay. By the way, you know, like I said, we've got some people who aren't feeling well. Last week, I was feeling like garbage, so I sure hope they didn't catch it from me. But if they did, oh well. And of course, here I am not updating the date on the round. It is this week's class roundup. So we'll get started right off the top. Can you adjust the color of an individual item in a shot, even if there's multiple other items with the same color? Short answer is yes. This would realistically be a job for doing any secondary color correction, meaning that you're using the eyedropper to select the color and then maybe trying to massage that selection so that you're getting exactly the color you want to limit. And then you can mask that color correction to just the area that you want to apply that effect to. That would be how I would tackle this. The short answer, of course, is that there is no one way to skin the cat, and there is probably another way that you could do this that is equally valid and may even be better than my idea. So, yeah. If you're making a movie for the big screen, but you also want to air it using a TV network, would you have to color correct to compensate for the lower resolution of the TV screen? That is an interesting question. I would generally say no to that. I generally would not say that you need to color correct because of lower resolution, but understand that broadcast TV, because it is going out over radio or digitized and then going out over radio, or digitized and then being crammed down a little copper wire to your house, it uses a very restrictive way to compress color. So that it can be transmitted to you. It used to be that it was, when everything was analog, it was all had to do with how much bandwidth you had inside the TV signal for color information. These days, it's all being sent to you either MPEG-4 or MPEG-2 to your set-top box or smart TV or whatever you're using to watch your broadcast TV these days. How many people are still watching broadcast TV? That's what I thought. Okay, 0 hands went up for the record. So, but yeah, there's you know, broadcast and even online, there's a very restricted color space, and what a that is very restricted as compared to what a movie projector or film stock can project onto a screen. Can you animate the color correction using keyframes to get a changing feel to the clip? That's a short answer. So to demonstrate this, I think what you're talking about is looking at, and I'm just going to create a throwaway project, and it keeps coming up with that. So into this project, I'm going to import some media, aren't I? Aren't you, Randy? Yes, I am. So let's go. We'll quickly import something off of our favorite server. Oop, not the Dropbox, but this, and then here we go. So you get to see me flounder through this. Oops, that was a mistake. Don't import everything. Oh, well. Wah, wah. All right, well, that demo went well. What do you think? I might have to come back to that. Okay, good. It canceled. I was like, oh, sure. So we'll just do a, yeah, this is a fine example of a throwaway video. So when you want to go into something like Lumetri, you want to basically drag this to a sequence. You want to work on this, and you say, well, there's no keyframes here. Understand that when you work in, when you apply any of these corrections to your clip, you actually have a Lumetri color control here that some of these, not all of them, but some of these values can be keyframed, including color temperature. The thing that I just changed actually can be keyframed. So you can keyframe from one color temperature. Let's see, we'll move forward a few frames, and we'll change the color temperature to that. And then so you'll see that as you scrub across, the color temperature changes. So yes, you can keyframe the Lumetri color control. You can keyframe any of these color controls to change the look over time. That can be a creative choice. I would not necessarily use it to, so famously, a good situation for this would be you're shooting a scene, your camera is indoors, and you're set to tungsten, and for whatever reason, your assistant director didn't think very clearly, and your shot is, while you're shooting, you're transitioning from indoors to outdoors, and you're going from tungsten color temperature to daylight, and it's perfectly color balanced interior. The minute you walk outside, first of all, you need to do an iris pull because it's going to be way more brighter. But second of all, your color temperature is now, everything's going to be blue cast. So if for some reason that was what you wanted to do, you could keyframe the color temperature in something like Lumetri to try and compensate for that. But that's a really bad idea, because remember what I told you last week about trying to correct color temperature differences is you're already in a losing position when you start to work that way. So think creatively on how you might duplicate the shot. See, if I had to do it over, what I would probably suggest is try to come up with an alternate way to arrange that shoot. Yeah.
Would that be a good way if you want color then black and white, like the next scene over, like kind of like in Kill Bill?
Did Kill Bill have a scene where while the camera was rolling, it went from color to black and white?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, then that would be one, but that's probably also just applying a tint effect, which basically by default would desaturate and then just keyframe the tint value from 0 to 100, and that would achieve the same thing as this. This is more like you want to change the exposure, you want to change the contrast, you want to change any of these settings you would like to alter as you go. Understand that they are keyframeable and you can adjust them as you go. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends more on your project than it does on, Premiere has set you up to be able to do it. Whether it's a good idea, that's an exercise for you to figure out on your own. So, yeah.
How true is that if you're shooting like a really high resolution raw? You have more control over the white balance and shooting raw?
So the question being, what if you were shooting this in RAW?
Yeah.
How would that change this?
Yeah.
Well, with RAW, what you're end up doing is you're pulling it. The information that's being stored is basically the actual values from the sensor. It's not trying to do any math on it before it stores it, which is what most processors inside of DSLRs and other things are doing when it's recording video. Is it sees the frame come in and it then crunches it and then encodes it to MPEG-4 and then stores it. That crunching part is where it basically applies white balance. It applies any contrast, sharpness, other settings that are built into the camera, and then renders it to and encodes it and renders it to the video file. For RAW, I mean that it changes the dynamic, but then again, with RAW, you would not want to be using lumetri on that, at least not for. I mean, lumetri is not really suited for that. For working with raw footage. For that, I would use the camera manufacturer's plugin that usually they would have that would be able to do all of that kind of color work. But again, when I was in film school, when Red was still young and novel, everyone was drunk with power when it came to the Red cameras. Which I still contend are just jet engines with an image sensor on them, and they you have so much control that you don't know where to. You kind of get lost because it's like anything's possible. It's like there's no up or down or sideways. You can do anything you want with it, and so people kind of went wildly out of control. So I don't want to get too deep down that rabbit hole, but that's generally speaking for raw footage where you have white balance control after the fact. I wouldn't worry about this. That's a different matter entirely. Good question, valid question, but just don't think it's applicable here. All right. Using the three-way color corrector, I was unable to successfully create a mask after selecting colors. Tried several times. Could not make a mask. Is this a problem with the three-way color corrector being obsolete? If it's unavailable, then what's the alternative? So actually, I'm answering this with a question. I know, and that's not very fair, but I'm still doing it. I think that you're creating a mask as it pertains to something like secondary color correction is not the same as creating a mask for the effect. So to try and make sense of this, let's go back to our favorite clip now that has a lumetri color, and we'll wipe that and we'll replace it with the three-way color corrector. Even though it's obsolete, still good times. All right, so here we are. We're now in full control of everything. We want to mess with the midtones. We want to cool off the highlights. We want to warm up the shadows. We want to, or whatever. Your mileage may vary. You get some change here. I will turn off the lights briefly so that you guys can see better what I'm doing. Okay. So now that you have this, you want to mask off a part of it. So you should be able to come up here and select that, and now your mask is only inside of this rectangle or inside of the So if it's not that mask, then you can also do it with the pen, where you can mark off a certain area. And now this area is all excluded from that effect, and here's the area that's included. So as you move it around, things happen. So was that the question, or I don't know whose question this was. So maybe this is everyone's going to look around and go like, "It wasn't me, man," and that's fine. Come on, go ahead. Let me get Lori, and then I'll get to you.
They were using the secondary and eliminating a color, or only using one color. So they were.
Okay, so it was using the secondary part of three-way.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, creating a mask is separate from. So that there's the creating a mask, as in this mask, which is not what we're talking about. Okay, good. Well, then let's slide down and take a look at that. So under secondary color correction, you do have the ability to show mask.
Right.
But the idea is that you want to pick a color, and then you want to, and this is very similar to Lumetri from the point of view of you want to apply this color to a, and when you click show mask, it's going to basically tell you what you've selected.
I was never able to get to that point.
You're never able to get to this point. Okay. Because what it's doing is it's just telling you, and this is very similar to the secondary color correction tools inside of Lumetri. It's just in Lumetri you have a little more visual ways of modifying them. Here it's very much like the controls are similar but not the same. So you have these bars that represent the for the actual hue, the color value, the saturation value, which is relatively low, and then the luma, or the brightness, is relatively high. But yeah, you should be, this should be available to you to be able to switch between telling you what colors you've picked up. So if you know that you want a little bit more of that gray, you can kind of keep pecking away at it with this tool to create that. Okay, make sense? Okay, buddy.
Yeah, how do you, it's possible to have multiple masks with different effects on the same frame?
Of course, yeah. So the question was, is it possible to have multiple effects with different masks on the same frame? You're talking about multiple masks on one control?
Yeah.
Yes. So you have the ability to create multiple masks with the same control. You have one mask here and another mask there. Okay. So you have the ability to do that. You have this ability in After Effects as well, but just, yeah, you have the ability in Premiere. It's just how you generate them is a little bit different. But yes, it's available to you, as is the ability to obviously track it and feather it and all of that other goodness. So, okay, so I'm going to move on because I've got lots of questions, but this was what I was concerned about, was the show mask part of the three-way. So, okay, so to answer the second part of this, is the three-way color corrector is in the obsolete category of effects. That doesn't mean that it's not useless. It's just, this is what they do to effects that they want to discourage you from using on new projects. That doesn't mean you can't. It just means they are not, they're like, hey, we got this great control called Lumetri we'd like you to use now. So they've categorized all of this into this obsolete category. That doesn't mean don't use them. It just means Adobe doesn't prefer you to use them. And you can take that with whatever frame of, whatever grain of salt you'd like, with how much you care about Adobe's feelings on the matter. Okay? All right. So back to the salt mines. So let's move on. When first organizing usable clips, is it wise to color correct all the master clips before actually cutting the film? Actually, not a bad question. Depends on whether your computer has enough horsepower to simultaneously apply color correction while also scrubbing clips and cutting to a sequence. That is my official phrase. Now, you might do temporary color work that lets you edit more effectively. Like if you're working on footage that's underexposed, you could apply a brightness to it so that you can see picture. and understanding that you're going to yank that color, you're going to yank those effects out and then do a proper color pass down the road, that's absolutely valid. And that's actually something an assistant editor would be very useful to do for you, would be not just logging, not just getting things laid out in bins and other things of that nature in terms of basic setting up of your edit, but also checking for, if for some reason it's like a night shoot and it's, or for some reason the footage is underexposed, you might take a note of like, this footage is underexposed. I've put a brightness on it, or I've put an exposure curve on it so that it's easier to cut. But understand that that might be a situation where the editor probably wouldn't use it if they had to choose. If they have a choice of a properly exposed take and an underexposed take, and the performances were reasonably close, I would not use the underexposed footage, because guess what? The dynamic range is probably not going to be as, it's going to be harder to match it with other footage that is properly exposed. So yeah, your mileage may vary. So but the answer is really, this answer is really about computer horsepower, and the whole edit friendly kind of question kind of pops its ugly head again, is like, how much are you basically occupying your computer's processing capability with something other than doing the job you need to get done? Is Premiere Pro the best program for color correction? This was the funniest question officially of the week. So no, generally speaking, I'm not going to say it's this universal, but generally speaking, the conventional wisdom still holds that for indie producers, DaVinci Resolve is still the best color tool out there. The good news for you guys is that there is a free version of this that you can use. Of course, Blackmagic wants to try and market it as a film editing program, which I would not use it for. But for color, it is fantastically capable and very powerful. Would I use SpeedGrade? No, I would not use SpeedGrade, because not very many people use SpeedGrade. Again, depends on how you feel about Adobe's feelings. I don't particularly have strong, sense that I need to protect what Adobe sees as canonical. I'll never be an Adobe certified training provider that way by saying such things, but that's okay with me. I'd rather you guys get the straight, straight answer from that perspective. DaVinci Resolve is still considered the strongest color tool for independent producers. And these are people who don't have tens of thousands of dollars to set up a color workflow. Okay? Because there are way more expensive tools out there. Trust me. In the film industry, is there anyone who does the job which specifies color correction like an audio editor? That would be what is commonly called the color artist or the colorist, are the people who do color work as their main way of making a living in the industry. And there are some very, very good ones. So yeah, yes.
Color correction, like sit in like this other room, it looks like a booth, and they have like these weird rotating, like I don't know what it's called.
Yeah. So
like they adjust the color by moving their hand over like these rotating.
okay, Alyssa makes it sound like this is like you hand wave over something and it does. No. I'm making fun. So the question is, don't color artists work with special control surfaces? Yes, they do. And they usually involve wheels and jog wheels, which are like a little wheel that surrounds, and then there'll be like maybe a mouse ball or something like that in the middle. And those actually correspond very closely to tools like this, okay? Because look what you got here is you have a wheel up here that turns, okay, that turns around and around. That would be like that outer wheel on those control surfaces. And then you have this capability where you can kind of move this wherever you want to make an adjustment in terms of how shadows have a color applied to them. And then there might be, the ability to increase or decrease the saturation of that color and yada, 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 all those things. But yes, there are control surfaces that are very basic for color work, where it's just one wheel, and then you have to basically kind of select what that one color wheel, mouse ball, whatever you call it, whatever that control is affecting. Or there's ones that are more expensive, more complicated, that have 3 or even more of those controls, and then bunches of extra buttons that let you set presets or select tools or select modes, or but the idea of them being in their own room, that's, I mean, generally speaking, colorists like to work in the dark because they don't want a lot of extraneous light affecting their color perception. But again, they're also capable of, most color people that I know will not just use their eyeballs to assess the color correction. They will also use scopes. So just be aware of that. But that's a good side question. So yeah, thanks for that. In Photoshop, we use RGB and CMYK. What is the difference between these two? Okay. Well, my glib answer is one is additive and one is subtractive. But more seriously, these color spaces are complementary with and they do inhabit different color spaces. How many people understand that still images, like when you work in Photoshop, that you have 10 channels available to you to work in? Can you name all 10 channels?
God knows. I know there's the RGB channels and then there's the alpha channel.
Okay, so you're close. So the first 7 everyone can get, right? Because they're listed right here. RGB, CMYK, that's 7. There's also a third color space that is mind-blowing in Photoshop that people don't use usually. It's called LAB. That basically can do some incredibly magical things depending on your point of view. So there's and this is way off the beaten path, and I want to stay on track tonight, but if you're interested in kind of really going down the rabbit hole of color in terms of stills, there's a fabulous community of people who that's all they do is pre-press analysis of still images. But for most video, you're not really dealing in CMYK. You might deal with HSL, which is hue, saturation, luminance. You might also sometimes, you don't usually deal directly in YUV or other things like that, which are broadcast related. But it's not out of the question. So, understand though that when you're dealing with CMYK, you're generally talking about print. Video, you're not usually going to be dealing with CMYK as a standard or color space, especially because the K, the black, is particularly painful for what we call pixel jockeys. So, because if you isolate black as its own color and then you're left with just C, M, and Y, then anytime the values of C, cyan, magenta, and yellow are the same, it basically turns transparent, because that moves to the black channel because it's a shade of gray. So yeah, it can get weird. When finishing film, does it matter whether audio correction or color correction is done first? Is there a preferred order? So generally speaking, there's no preferred order. What I would suggest is that you would do color correction first, where you can get consistent color and exposure from shot to shot throughout your entire film. That's your first color pass, is what you might call that. Then I would go and do audio work, because that's because once you have a properly adjusted for color and contrast exposure, and your picture's just looking good, just get busy cutting and making, telling your story. Then work on audio. Then come back and do a color pass separately. You could do the color pass before audio. You could. And maybe that would help you to not make edits in your picture when you move to audio. Because what always happens is every time you go back to the editor, you go back to Premiere once you've worked on audio, and you go, well, I just want to add a couple of frames here. You've now blown away, and now you basically have to go back into your audio your workstation and move that everything down 2 frames that you added those 2 frames in. So adding and removing footage becomes a thing for this this round trip of going from editor to digital audio workstation and then back. Having trouble fully comprehending lumetri scopes. Does the location of marks on the scope correspond to the location of the shot? Blotch on the left side represents light values on the left side of the shot. So yeah, the waveform scope only really correlates to the video frame from left to right. It really doesn't, from top to bottom, the values are totally different. High values on the waveform correspond to brightness values or RGB, and low values correspond to darker values. So just to remind you guys, if we go back into, we'll ditch the three-way color corrector, we'll go back into color here, and we will once again screw with this to enable it. When you are dealing with scopes, you have a wide variety of options here. There's no, and a future question actually asks a good part of this, but the idea is that you have, wait, which question was this again? Oh yeah, the correlation between this edge of the scope corresponds to this edge of the frame. This edge of the scope corresponds to this edge of the frame. Everything in the middle corresponds to kind of its analogous portion from left to right. From top to bottom, it's all about the different pixels that are here. The trouble that you run into is if for, okay, so let me get, I'll make it easy. This is how we're going to do this. So we're going to go to effect controls. I'm going to basically bring in an effect. I'm going to call flip, right? Vertical flip. I'm going to apply that to this clip, all right? So I'm going to put it ahead of lumetri color. Now, when we go back to the scopes, the waveform is the same. Okay, the waveform has not changed. The picture has. Now all your bright pixels are down here at the bottom, but they're still up here at the top on this graph. Does that help? Does that help kind of make the difference here? The distinction is left to right is the only correlation between the scopes and the frame of video. So top to bottom, there's no correlation except for the values that are in aggregate. So the fact that you have lots of bright pixels here means that you have a relatively bright line here that is clearly shifted to red, and it's been warmed up. And I think that's because of my color temperature.
Can you flip it back?
Can I flip it back? Of course I can.
See the other.
Sure. Let me. I'm gonna basically do it down here so that I can. So we can see the scopes and the vertical flip. So I'm going to turn the vertical flip on and off, and the scopes don't change, because the idea is that it's the left to right correlation. Now, if I added horizontal flip, now you see that it's a mirror image of, because we're flipping left to right, the left to right correlation shows up. So now everything, the graph reverses when you do a horizontal flip. So this is not a question of why horizontal and vertical flip are useful in Premiere, other than illustrating that the graph doesn't change when you vertically flip your image, okay? All right. Good question. Hope that answered it. Any explanation of why the blue-orange look has become so prevalent in big movies? Suggests that complementary colors are a look that is easy to apply, or is there some trend that has made it so common? All right, so the short answer is it's the shiny principle. My shiny principle is like, ooh, so-and-so did it, so I want to do it. It's shiny. It's the shiny thing. And so, yeah, the longer answer is even weirder, is that it's just lazy filmmaking. If you're just doing the same color look that everyone else does, okay, whatever, cooling off your highlights and warming your shadows, or vice versa, cooling your shadows, warming your highlights. A lot of people do those. How much you do it, or to what extent you do it, could make a difference. Maybe not. With color correction, it usually depends on perspective, but is there a set standard people try to adhere to? This is a tough question. What's that? That's not what. Oh, is that what the question's about? I took it to mean more of just a general aesthetic. If it's about skin tone, though, that is another question we'd get to, and I do talk about it here.
Perspective of filmmakers, though, what they think skin tone should be.
No, there's actually even in really extreme color cases. Now, obviously, Sin City being an example that's bizarrely complicated, but it takes skin tones and basically just turns them black and white, so they're shades of gray. That's one way. But if you are representing color, or if you are representing skin tones on film, they generally fall in a very narrow band. Even if you're doing wild color moves elsewhere, you still want your skin tones to generally stay inside that range. Because if you fall too far outside of it, you look ruddy or you look jaundiced. And you don't want either of those. You want something that looks normal for that person's skin. So, and people with darker skin generally have a little bit more, they shift a little bit more to the red, a little bit, very, very minor. People from Asia, they generally will shift a little bit more to yellow or orange, but just a little bit. It's still in a very, very narrow range. And so that's why you keep saying that from that one perspective, you very consistently keep to maintaining skin tones in that range can make or break your look. Would you ever want to perform multiple color corrections for different viewing forms, cinema screens, televisions? I originally thought the answer to this was probably not, but I think that there's an argument to be made that there is a look that you could apply that does a general move of the entire film content to a narrower color space and also maybe brighten it a little bit for mobile screens. Because what you'll generally find is that for projection, your films are going to be pretty dark looking on a screen, on a regular screen, whereas for YouTube and other online delivery, you probably want a little bit brighter. So that's an area of, I know that a lot of post-production houses do have their own trade secrets on that respect. So just be aware that, there are people who spend a lot of time figuring out how to make something look great in the theater and on your computer screen. You're up against people that have lots more resources than you. So experiment and try it on different screens. You probably have one of these. You should watch it on this. You probably have one or something of a laptop or a desktop computer. Watch it on that. Download it, put it onto something that you can play it on your television in your house. Put it on a friend's or projector like this. And if you really want to get crazy, you can, if you have the resources, you can rent a movie theater, and play your film in a movie theater. You can do it. It costs you money. It won't let you do it for free unless you know the theater owner and you're willing to come in way off of hours and early in the morning or something like that before they're open to the public. There are ways to work these sorts of things out. Okay, so don't feel like you're stuck, but you can do this research. There's nothing to stop you from doing it. Do professional editors apply brightness and contrast to every clip? This is the first effect I put on my clip before doing any other color correcting. Is that the way things are commonly done? So, I wouldn't use brightness and contrast as the name of the plugin because it artificially kind of clamps your video footage to a very narrow range that won't perform well if you do additional color work on top of that. So again, I would use, if I were to use brightness and contrast, it would just be to be able to cut to picture, and then I would pull that effect off and then do a proper color pass for the final look. Out of the three color correction tools, autocorrect, don't use that. Three-way color correct and fast is the overall best option to use. What circumstances would film have to be in to require one of the other color correction tools? So it used to be that it was the three-way color corrector all the way, and now it's Lumetri über alles. But the other color tools in Premiere, and absolutely the color tools that you have available to you in After Effects, are good for very specific things that you're trying to do. Lumetri is a very it's a very thorough color tool, and you can use it in very finessed ways on very specific things that you want to fix. And then you can apply another Lumetri color control and another one on top of that. You can stack them pretty deep until your computer goes, wait, I can't keep up. And then that's when you start to save your stuff as look files, and then you can just apply the look, and that's much faster. But yeah, most of the other color tools are also not very, they're very unsophisticated. So, your mileage may vary. When color correcting, is it okay to use only one or two of the Lumetri scope options, or is it best to use all of them to fix the image or clip? So each person will favor one tool over another. You're going to favor using, so you have plenty of options with the scopes. So again, with this, you do have this one waveform that shows you our red, green, and blue kind of overlaid on each other. You don't have to do it that way. You can also do just a straight up Luma where it's just the brightness. You can do, you have also a what they call a YC, which is basically your Luma and your Chroma overlaid one on top of the other. So this is all color information, not just red, green, and blue, but all color information. So you can kind of judge how much of your scene is colored. And then when you get to the parades and stuff like that, you have different parade settings too. So you can customize this to your, to your heart's content. And you have, see, here's YUV. So this is, again, this is your Luma, and then there's the U and the V channels, which vaguely correspond. Why they put them in here as magenta and yellow is just to help you differentiate them so that you don't think that they're red, green, and blue. Let's see, parade time. So yeah, you have, yeah, then they can do RGB in just monochrome so that you'll just know that that's red, that's green, and that's blue. You don't have to see them in color. Because some people have trouble with color vision, and they can still color correct because they have this ability to kind of compare numbers and do the work by the numbers, and you're generally going to be pretty consistent. And remember also that the waveform scope is, or sorry, not the waveform scope, but the vector scope. Let me start to pull off some of these. Is really on, this is the other one. This is the HLS instead of the YUV one. So the vector scope is really just going to tell you the overall color saturation. It's not going to tell you the how that color saturation refers to anything that's on screen. Okay, I got a few more, and then we'll be done with this. Aside from using the wrong white balance for a scene, what is the most obvious giveaway for unnatural or poor color correction? What should you use as a baseline for successful color correction? Blacks, whites, and skin tones. The answer here is bad skin tones will always be a giveaway. If your skin tones are way outside that narrow range that I talked about last week, you're in trouble, because it's going to basically be obvious to anyone who looks at it that something's not right. People, when people are watching a film, they're attracted to eyes and mouths and hands. These are things that humans naturally kind of are naturally attracted to when they're seeing it on screen. So if you mess up the skin tones of faces and hands, people are going to notice, and there's like, something's wrong, something's off. Now, if the scene says it's a day for night, or it's a night shot, it's, and you're, you want to basically say, oh, it's lit by the moon. What are you going to do? You're going to put a blue cast on the people's faces. It's almost like a film noir sort of look, but it's just with the blue filter on it. People kind of they'll give you a pass on that. But if it's a daylit scene and somebody's face looks green, no. If somebody's face looks purple, no. Unless they're an Oompa Loompa and it's Willy Wonka, you're not doing that to a person's face, okay? So just be aware that there are norms that you want to fall into. Now, again, there's always the possibility of having of knowing the rules before breaking them is valid, but at the same time, don't get out of hand. Bad skin tones, try to avoid at all costs. Are there any better ways to use and understand color other than the wheel that it gives you? So live the color wheel, love it. So when you get to the point of working with these tools like the color wheels and the three-way color control, all of this stuff, there's a reason why they're laid out this way, and it has a lot to do with you know, and same with this is like, you know, the vector scope here correlates exactly with the scope here. All right, so it's like you've got your blues are blues, you've got magentas, you've got reds, and so on, all the way around the wheel. That lets you know where you stand when you're dealing with a color wheel, so that you can you know how to you have the same tool in front of you each time. So as you get familiar with these concepts, don't get too freaked out about it, but just understand that these are set this way because they've always, well, I mean, all right, that's not terribly sincere, but I was about to say that it's always been that way, and that's BS. But it is very common, and it's very industry standard practice right now to work with inside this context, and there's no reason to change it. There's no compelling reason to change it, so we still use it that way. How did non-industry professionals do color correction before Lumetri? It's like you thought, what do they use? Eyedroppers and color food dye? No. Was making Sin City type effects possible for non-professionals before Lumetri? Of course it was, because there's better tools than Premiere. There are better tools and more sophisticated tools available to you than what Premiere offers you, or even After Effects. DaVinci Resolve is one of them. There are very effective color plugins that you can get that will help with some of this work as well. And they're easier in a lot of ways, or they have better controls. They might not be faster. They might just be easier for you to grasp, and that's fine. That just makes it your preference. There's nothing wrong with your preference. So just be aware that they're making Sin City had more to do with pulling a key and limiting the amount of color that you allowed onto the set when you shot the film. Very carefully crafting what colors were present made doing a film like Sin City possible. Okay, so it wasn't about Lumetri color controls or other stuff. It was how the film was shot is what helped make Sin City possible. Would you recommend using a plugin like Colorista, or is Lumetri good enough? Well, normally I would have used Red Giant Colorista. I used it for years, but right now Lumetri gives a really solid run for the money, especially since it's included with Premiere. That counts for a lot. Lumetri is a very capable tool. It's more capable now than it was last year. And it looks like Adobe's committed to it, so it's probably going to be more capable next year, and so on. So if you are going to stay in this ecosystem of working with Adobe, get to know the Lumetri control, because Adobe seems committed to it. And if you're going to do a lot of projects in Premiere, it's probably helpful to have it. We will talk about color again in After Effects, and we'll revisit some of this conversation. We'll talk about some of the shortcomings of Lumetri at that point. What kind of color correction would you use to, boy, this is good phrasing. Would you use to where a whole film would be in black and white except for a single color, such as red or yellow? Again, this is the Sin City look. Keying is the technique. It's not using a single color control and saying everything else is black and white. It's basically they're using the keying capability and again, once again, knowing exactly what colors they have captured on camera, and then working backward from that. That is the show there. All right. So it is 8 o'clock. Let's take like a brief, quick break, maybe 5 minutes. Come on back and we'll resume. We've got, don't freak out. If you're interested, what you can do is start up After Effects on your workstations, and we'll probably be toying with it a little bit, doing our first tentative steps into a bigger world. All right, so 5 minutes. We'll turn it away. Okie dokie. First words out of my mouth is start to cough. That's super. Okay. Let's march forward with the evening. Hopefully, tonight we can take a little bit of time so that you're not spending too much of it watching me do stuff, and you guys can start to play a little bit more. Let's talk about what we've been through already so far this term. Is we've talked about Premiere, and we've talked about Adobe Audition, and now we're starting to move into the part of the course where we're going to spend the bulk of our time, and that is After Effects. How many of you guys have used? I know it was like, yeah. All right. How many of you guys have used After Effects? I want a show of hands. How many of you guys have used it in any capacity? What have you used it for?
Animation final last semester.
Okay, so you used it for actual animation of a project. How about you? Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
I used it for motion tracking.
Motion tracking. Oh, that's cool. How about?
I've taken a class on After Effects like when I was back in the fall.
So why are you in this class? No, I'm kidding. That's cool. All right. So you've done a wide variety of stuff. What version of After Effects are you using?
CS6.
Okay. Well, it's changed a bit, but not a lot.
CS5, I think.
Okay, 5 or 5.5. That was the first real version of After Effects that like a lot of people started using.
Like tracking and all that stuff.
Yeah. So okay.
Animation projects.
Animation project. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So After Effects is it is everything. So this is the portion of the class where I'm gonna come up with there's a tagline I use when I come to questions that you don't want or if you ask a question phrased the wrong way about After Effects, my answer will be this: the rabbit hole has no bottom. Okay? So and I mean that in the nicest way possible. I do not say that to mean that it's not worth exploring how deep you can bother to go down the rabbit hole, but that there is really no, in a lot of ways, if you embark on a career where After Effects is the primary tool of your craft, you will have a lifetime of learning ahead of you with this tool. It will never, ever stop. Ever. I've looked down the rabbit hole and I've seen that it has no bottom. And I'm here to tell you, that's what I'm going to tell you. When you tell me, Randy, can it do this? Can I do this in After Effects? The rabbit hole has no bottom. Can I make Sin City looks? That should be trivial for you guys. But yes. Can I animate, things to look like explosions are happening in my own home? Sure. I mean, how many ways would you like me to answer the question with the word yes? So yeah, my default answer, and it will come up. You guys are going to ask questions about things in After Effects for the Q&A, and my pat response. You're going to see it on the screen. The rabbit hole has no bottom. And I'll just look at you like, I may not know the answer to some of these questions because I haven't explored that deeply in that particular realm, but that doesn't mean it's not possible, and it doesn't mean that the right frame of mind or the right approach would not solve this problem. There are many ways to skin a cat is the other phrase I like to use a lot, because there's no one way to do just about anything in After Effects. There's 4 or 5 ways to do anything, and sometimes they can be from I just put a keyframe on it and change the keyframe over time to I put an expression on it and it loops forever. So there's all kinds of things. So let's talk about what we're going to do in the next 45 minutes, if I can help it. First off, we're going to review the quiz. Hooray! Finally. You guys can pillory me on that, and then we'll talk about interface and basic workflow. I will talk about dynamic linking with Premiere. There's a bullet point in here about keyboard differences. These are important ones for you so that you don't make mistakes. These are common beginner mistakes in After Effects. Setting up projects and getting organized, your first composition, and then export and render queue. So yeah, let's review that. Well, let's not review that. Let's review the quiz. Oh, and that means I got to dump out of this and go over here. All right, so quiz summary. All right, not super. So what I wanted to do is I'm gonna whip through these kind of fast so that we can kind of look through these. Understand that I totally screwed you guys on this one. This was actually a correct answer, so I'm going to basically give this one to everyone. So this question I'm going to remove from the quiz because that was supposed to say intermediate exports, so that it tripped a bunch of you up, and that's my bad. So you guys were not incorrect for that, but so yeah, you guys can grumble. That's fine. Okay, get it over with. All right, now moving on. Next up, Apple ProRes 422 is considered an edit-friendly intermediate codec. Would H.264 codec be considered edit-friendly? Seemed like this one tripped a lot of you up. So the correct, don't grumble. The correct answer is that since H.264 doesn't encode every frame completely, it is not edit-friendly. This is what I talked about. When you have a playhead in your editor of an H.264 encoded file, if the playhead is not on what they call an iframe of that video, which is where those frames in the video that all of the pixels are encoded for that frame, if it's either before or after that iframe in the editor, your editing software has to go back to the last iframe and render all of the frames silently render all of the frames up to where your playhead is, and then render that onto screen for you. That is what I mean by edit friendly. So when you say H.264 is a lossy codec, so it isn't edit friendly, that's not why. Because actually, you can argue that ProRes 422, Cineform, and DNxHD are lossy codecs. They are not flawless. They're not pixel matched to the original footage. They're just better. They're just very low. Their encoding or their compression is very low, and so it's not considered lossy. Or lossy is not the reason why it's not edit friendly. H.264 can be edited directly in Premiere. Yes, it can. So yeah, it's edit friendly. That's not what I was getting at. And this is the DMV portion of the program where I go, the best answer is, and you guys grumble like ever. All right. So moving on. Yeah. So and this last one was I was like, no, that's not it either. So the fact that H.264 can be encoded into any of these container formats, AVI, MP4, MOV, QuickTime MOV, that's not what would make it edit friendly. The reason that it's edit friendly is that for ProRes, for Cineform, for DNxHD and others, even the QuickTime animation format, every single frame is encoded to the file so that when your playhead is on a certain frame of video, it's going to the file directly. It pulls all of the pixels for that frame and puts them up on screen. Okay. Once we got past those two questions, things kind of ironed out a bit, and I was happy to see that. So the Apple ProRes 422 is a codec that you can export to, regardless of whether you work on Windows or Mac. That should be pretty straightforward. ProRes 422 is really only available to export to on Macs. If you want to get into the deeper political discussion of, well, you have FFmpeg and you can export some raw footage to FFmpeg and then export it as 422. It's like, yeah, you could, but why would you? So I don't go down that road. So the correct answer is really for all intents and purposes, if you're going to create a ProRes 422 file, you're doing it on a Mac. Or you're doing it on a recorder that's licensed to export it that way. because there's recorders out there, from convergent device. Oh Jesus, I can't even remember all the different ones. So I know that AJA has it, and there's I know Blackmagic does some recording to ProRes. There's a bunch of devices out there that you can rent or purchase that will record ProRes. They're licensed to do that. Windows computers are not licensed to do that. If you can't export your video to ProRes, then using GoPro Cineform is acceptable. I found that to be relatively. One person said you should always export to NTSC DV. Way to troll me, but you didn't get points for that. All right, way to troll me, but no way am I going to give you points for that. All right, that's throwing away points right there. Jeez, there was an answer you could have gotten me. That was the one I didn't want anyone to get. All right, so what two-letter abbreviation commonly used to identify tracks containing dialogue? Did we not go through this enough? There's the two-letter abbreviations for those three things: dialogue, music, and sound effects. DX, MX, and FX. So that's what those are for. Describe, what's that?
Why sound effects FX?
Well, because it's the SX would sound weird. No, FX because
That is true.
FX because I think it's the affectation of it sounds like effect. But and special effects, I know that there's and there's television networks now, FX, whatever. So I don't know the historical reason why it was chosen, but I just know that it is. So yeah. Describe what it can sound like when you overuse or aggressively apply noise reduction to an audio clip. It generally will sound like you're speaking into a tin can. That's that tinny, metallic, kind of thin and reedy sort of sound. And it's a phasing problem. Sometimes it's because you're basically removing certain audio patterns from in the noise print, and that is actually creating this kind of weird phasing effect onto the audio of what's being spoken. So that can give it that quality of sounding like it's being, it's being run through some kind of effects processor. What's following is the correct process for using process noise reduction. And this is just, you guys generally did okay with this one. Capture noise print, select noisy audio, and then process the noise reduction. These are, if you wanted to change or automate the volume over all of the audio clips in a particular track, that's why it's italicized. You should use the audio track mixer. Audio clip mixer is really just used for the single, for automating or affecting individual clips in a timeline. So then there's a question of, is it fixed or is it standard? These are which effects are fixed effects, which are standard effects. So motion is a fixed effect. You guys did pretty well with that. Fixed or standard opacity, again, you guys did pretty well. Fixed or standard volume, again, did all right. Time remapping, also. Blur, yeah, it's a standard. Fixed or standard horizontal flip. And it's starting to fool a bunch of you. In Final Cut days, when it was Apple, if it was Apple, then your flips and your crops were built in. They were fixed effects. In Premiere, they are not. So just be aware of that. So
That's a little mean that they were all these questions are basically about the same thing, crop or flip. I figured it's either, if you get one wrong, you get the others wrong.
Well, yeah, and the reason why is that's why I went through the whole talk about what fixed effects are in Premiere, and that they are, motion, opacity, volume, time remapping. So those are the fixed effects that you can have. And that's just for putting it into a sequence, for putting a clip into a sequence, you get those effects. You can't remove them. You can't add them to a clip that isn't in a sequence.
I was
So
talking about those three questions, like the crop and the horizontal.
yeah, well, the reason why we put those in is because I always got tripped up by that when I was when I first started using Premiere, was because I came from Final Cut, where I knew that those were built-ins, and then now they were something I had to add on separately. And so, yeah, it's trick questions, man. That's what I do. All right. Blending modes are substantially similar between Photoshop, After Effects, and Premiere Pro. You can tell I haven't talked this much in a while. Yeah, and they generally behave identically, and that's realistically the most correct of all of these. Blending modes are available within the motion effect. No, they are available within opacity. If you look back at this, where we go to that's right, effects controls, I moved over here, so I'll put it back up. Here, if you look at the opacity group, here's blend mode right here, and there's your blend modes, and you can, go have fun with that. Okay, so that was the quiz. So I'm going to be giving everybody a couple extra points each for the fact that I bombed you on the first question. But yeah, the one that was really kind of surprising was this one where the edit friendly. Maybe it's that I didn't give you guys the edit friendly kind of mantra, didn't beat it into you hard enough. But realistically, edit friendly just means that it's easier on your computer to edit. It's not easier on you. It's easier for your computer to use. And it used to be required. It used to be that you had to do this. You are not required to do it anymore because you can just take H.264 QuickTime movies and drop them from your SD card and immediately start to cut picture in Premiere. And man, when that feature first happened, we were all like, woo, raise the roof, And now people kind of like going, well, you mean there was something before this? The before time, the long ago? And, yeah, there was. And it was called everything got transcoded as your first step before you could possibly start editing. Okay? All right. Back in the old days, before we had to walk uphill to get to our edit station, both ways, in the snow. All right. On the weekend. Rain or shine. Okay. The week was 7 days long and no weekends. They paid us and no, it probably was potato chips, but all right. So, all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick little tour of the After Effects interface. So if you have After Effects open, you're welcome to join me on this fun journey. Now, so if you are interested in having some content to work with, go ahead and pull down the class 1 content from the server, and you can load these computers are all fast enough that you could load that AEP project that's in there. You might have to save it because it's an older version of After Effects that I created it. But so yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. I'm gonna do that. So we're gonna go in here, CS74.21, and not A because that would upset Mike. And we'll do class 1 and the in-class files. So. No. So we have to basically pull this Chimera project. Let's pull the whole project. So copy this to your desktop. And what's that? No, week 1, class 1, and the Chimera crowdfunding. And of course, we're going to saturate the computer network here in the building. What's that? Yeah, go ahead and pull in the whole folder. It's the footage will help you to be able to see what's happening in this. Again, we're just gonna fool around a little bit with the interface tonight. We'll talk about how to create compositions. So the thing about compositions, while it's doing this, let's go back here and when you talk about a Premiere, there is kind of like what is the primary work product of Premiere? What would you? Does anyone have an idea what I'm asking when I say the primary work product? When you go into Premiere, what are you doing? You're editing, right? What do you edit with? Either. First one. A sequence. Yes. Okay. So a sequence is your primary work product inside of Premiere. The way you know that's the case is what happens when you hit Control N or Command N inside of that program. What are you creating? Inside of Premiere, Command N creates a new sequence. That is your primary work product. Okay? So just putting it out there so that you understand that it's not a project and it's not a title or it's not a, you know, and it's not a video. Video is the content. The work product is the sequence. It's what you're working with is what you're creating. So in After Effects, what do you think the work product is? A composition, okay? And that's what happens when you hit Command or Control N is you get a new composition. And I'm gonna have to turn my lights off again so that you guys can see the screen. And the buzzing stops too. That's the bonus of this. But you guys also fall asleep on me. So try to stay awake. Half an hour more, we'll be through this. All right, so when you create a new composition, you are confronted by this screen of options. Get used to seeing this. You're going to see this a lot. So when you look at new compositions, you have the ability to you have some presets that you can work from. Again, if you use any of these, I'm going to publicly ridicule you. I'll put your name on screen with so-and-so. Put that. I'm not kidding. I've had enough of NTSC DV. So please don't make me do this to you. Please stop using NTSC DV. I don't care what Mike wants you to do. You're not in his class. You're in my class. Humph. So there are some tantalizing options here. Generally speaking, you'll limit yourself to probably one of these three, depending. Well, these two really: 1080-24 or 1080-2997. There is like I said, tantalizing options of UHD. You guys know what UHD is, right? The always vaunted 4K. So yeah, what for fun and giggles, what is the screen resolution of UHD? The horizontal and vertical. Anybody know? 3840 by 2160. Any guys want to hazard a guess why that is? Well, it's because it's double the horizontal and vertical of a 1080p frame. So 1920 times 2 is 3840, and 1080 times 2 is 2160. So it is 4 times an HD frame size. So that's why they call it UHD, ultra high definition. And then what's going to happen when they get to 8K? Because they're starting to introduce 8K now. It's like super ultra, zupa. You know, it's going to be like that. You know, it's coming. In fact, they just have it. They just call it UHD 8K. There you go. So they even have it here where you can create an 8K, 8,000 pixels wide by, roughly 4,000 pixels tall. Well, some computers can process it. Some, but not very many. Not in real time. And certainly, so that generally speaking, I would favor the 1080-24, which gives you a 1080p frame, 24 frames a second. If you feel so inclined to use the NTSC, 2398, you're welcome to. Generally speaking, you can reconform all of this to when you take it back into your edit, but whatever, it's fine to fall under this. The other part of the frame size, the frame rate, and the duration are like the three, or those are the three kind of things you want to set every time you work in a new composition. So duration is just basically how long your composition is currently set to. It is not a final determination. You can always lengthen it or shorten it to your needs. So I don't go with 30 seconds. Usually I'm working in increments of about 10 seconds. So I usually leave my duration at 10 seconds and then click OK. And now the screen has kind of changed a bit for us. Let's talk about what's the similar and what's different from what we've seen before. So there are areas of this that should look very familiar from Premiere anyway, is that you have this kind of idea of a project panel, right? So on the right and the top left, you have a project panel, and then you have these items that are in that project panel, which is very much like media clips. You know, you can do bins. They don't call them bins here. They call them folders. Go figure. It's After Effects. They call them folders. Premiere, they call them bins. Get over it. You do have the ability to, so you also have what looks like a preview window. This is a little more sophisticated than just a preview window, or preview pane, as it were. And then you have this timeline, which looks a lot like a sequence. You have different lanes, swim lanes, or tracks, or what this is going to actually have more in common with Photoshop. These are called layers because they are layering. So anybody want to throw out an idea of what a composition entails? Why do they call it a composition? You're composing multiple layers of content to create to create your final composite. So the idea of having multiple layers of content is helpful in terms of it's familiar from the point of view of how you worked in Photoshop with multiple layers. We will be doing a module or a unit later on where we will work in Photoshop a little bit and bring it into After Effects. So just understand that there is a correlation there. The layers that you have in Photoshop, when you bring that Photoshop file into After Effects kind of can treat it like it's a composition, and then you have access to those layers again inside of After Effects that you had in Photoshop. All right, so what do we want? I'm sure that I've downloaded my content by now. So what we'll do is, what's nice is that you can double click on this project pane, and it will bring up I think this is for importing. Let's find out. Let's find out, shall we? No, this is for actually. Yeah, okay. It'll open up content and place it into your project. So let's set this aside for a second. Let's go back to open the project from the Chimera crowdfunding folder. Hopefully by now you guys have seen it all. So the project we're going to open is this file right here, Chimera crowdfunding 2017.aep. AEP specifies a After Effects project. Click open. It's going to missing effect. Oh, Colorista 2. See? Hey, Randy used to use Red Giant a lot. So yeah, and we can actually work through that. If you ever find that you find this sort of situation where things are way off the edge of the screen, you're like, what the hell, Randy? That looks like it's because the window kind of got really wide. So you can either do in Windows, I think there's a similar control to kind of bring the boundaries of the app back into the size of your screen display. But as soon as I do that, everything kind of collapses. So now that we have a project with a little more going on in here, we have the ability to take a look at some of the other pieces that are present on screen for us. Okay, so The other piece of behavior that is consistent with Premiere is when you highlight a pane with your mouse or whatever, and you hit the back tick or the the tilde key that's next to the number 1 on your keyboard, you can actually zoom that pane to fill up your screen, which is useful for if you're doing timeline work or you're looking at a preview and you want to see the whole preview, fill the screen as much as possible, or whatever. I mean, whatever you're needing to use there, you are of course welcome to follow into that. The other part of this that you'll notice is you have some info windows, which actually will look familiar to you from Photoshop. You have a preview transport control. You have then you have an effects and presets, which is very similar to the effects group inside of Premiere. However, you now have effect controls on the menu, which is something you don't have in Premiere. So again, there are multiple ways to skin the cat in After Effects. So the fun thing about this is this this composition, this pan overlay that I created from this project is desperately simple. It really only has 2 things in it. It has the video file, which is the media that's playing in the background, and then it has the composition that uses it. And everything else is kind of captured inside this set of layers. And I'm not going to go into much detail about the whole lights and 3D tracker and all this other stuff. That is for another lesson down the road. We're not going to talk about 3D animation until I think after spring break. But it is interesting to show. Another thing that's changed from Premiere, where you look here in Premiere and you see that you have your tool palette is kind of this little set of tools here. Selection tool, your track selects, your rolling and ripple edits, and and slip and slide tools and so on. Over here, your tools are all up along the top. Okay, so it's important to be aware that you have a variety of tools that you can use all over, but they're fixed in place. Actually no, now you can move them. They didn't used to be that you could move these. They used to be fixed up there. Now you can actually reposition them, but you notice that the tool palette is a lot beefier. There's a lot more stuff on this tool palette than there was. If I drop this somewhere, you'll see that now it kind of takes that real estate up, and it's all of these add up to the toolbar for After Effects. So I'm going to reset my workspace right now, and up here we've got the selection tool again, which should be very familiar to you. You've got a hand tool. Hand tool is good for positioning, and you can use the hand cut. So it's good for positioning things on screen. If you need to just shift things around, you can certainly use the hand tool for that. You can also zoom in and out, so you have a plus and a minus. You can actually zoom in and out of a composition until it or have it fill the frame. You have rotation tools, camera tools, pan behinds. We're going to talk about pan behind. That comes into play with the anchor point. Pens, horizontal text. And then these kind of play into a lot more of the Photoshop tools again. You have brush tools, you have clone stamps, you have an eraser, you have a roto brush, which we will spend a whole week on, and then you have a puppet pin tool, which again we will spend a considerable amount of time on later. You do have workspaces just like in other Adobe tools. So you do have the ability to switch between different workflow where panels are laid out differently. Generally speaking, I leave it on standard for what I do. This I've gotten used to working this way in After Effects for most of the work that I do. Down in now let's talk briefly about this. Whoops, I'm still on the. All right. Zoom out. Meh. All right. So if we want to talk about this window here, we'll zoom this, and you'll see that we can zoom our composition so that it fills the frame. You have a bunch of controls along the bottom of this window. Let me see if I can shift this up a little bit. All right. So you have a bunch of controls along the bottom of this window, and so each of them do actually make a difference. Some of these, for magnification purposes, you can fit your composition to screen using this control here, which is your zoom. You have the ability to put guides and other things, other visual helpers on the screen, so you can do things like title and action safe markers or just a proportional grid. You have the ability to toggle masks on and off. We'll have that opportunity to play with that when we do mask stuff. You have a time code indicator, which tells you where you are in the composition based on this time code here. So, and where's the start time code? Oh, sorry, that's in Premiere. I was like, wait, what did I just do? So, all right, go back to this. If we switch this back out to look at everything, you'll see that as the playhead moves, the time code increases. So you have the ability to take snapshots of what's on the screen and save it as a still image, which can help with some pre-visualizations. You have the ability to limit color channels. This is very similar to Photoshop as well, where you can choose just to show your reds, your greens, your blues, and then you also have an alpha channel, which is your transparency. Now, in this case, nothing's transparent, and so for this composition, nothing's transparent, and so it's all white. You have the notion of this is an automatic downsample. So what happens is that when you play a composition in After Effects, it wants to try and play it in real time. But what it will do is it will play every frame for you. So if it takes a long time for that frame to render, After Effects will render it and display it for you. It will not skip frames to try and keep up. So if it falls behind computationally, it's just going to basically slow down and keep showing you this new stuff as it comes in. You can actually, as part of that, you can have it automatically reduce the resolution of the composition on screen in this viewport so that it can try and keep up as well. But there comes a point where you can only down res so far before it's just 8 blocks of color on screen. You have the ability to denote a region of interest. This is based on what's selected. You have a transparency grid that if there was nothing on screen, so if I were to hide the video layer and turn on the transparency screen, you'll see that there is a transparent grid. Again, this is very similar to Photoshop in that respect. You have the idea of camera views, and we will talk about this more when we talk about 3D in full, more detail. You have the ability to toggle pixel aspect ratios, select fast previews, show the composition flowchart. This is actually kind of a fun thing. Now, when it's a simple composition such as this, your composition flowchart is going to look really basic. But as you start to layer things, and maybe we'll talk. We have discussions about pre-comps, pre-compositions, where you will group things together and then create a new composition just for those things, and then link it back into the composition that was originally in. That's called pre-composing, and there are reasons to do that. There are well-defined reasons to do it, and then there's also just kind of the organizational reasons. So as we go back to here you also have the ability to affect the exposure of just this viewport, okay? So if for some reason it's too dark and you need to make it brighter, you can. And I apologize because, yeah, this is the last setting on here. So, and this generally corresponds to exposure stops as opposed to just like brightness control. You just turn the brightness all the way up. So you'll see that it kind of tends to blow out your highlights. But at the same time, if you're looking for a detail in the shadows where you normally might not have a whole lot of detail to work with here, you can increase the contrast or increase the exposure, and it's just showing you in this window. It is not what's going to be out exported. So this is just for this view that you have. Okay. Now let's talk about the layers. I'm kind of going through this for a reason, because I want you to be a little familiar with a lot of these. Some of these will be obvious to you. You have eyeballs here for visibility, right? So this will show or hide any particular layer on here, and that's all the way over here on the left, lower left. You have these three boxes that sometimes show up. If there's no audio for a particular layer, that box will not exist. For this one, the audio is disabled. If you turn it on, it will basically play the audio when you play when you do the preview. If you turn it off, it won't. So that normally when you play a preview, it's just going to show you it's not going to play audio. If you turn it on, then it will try and play audio for you. And of course, I don't think I have audio turned on correctly. All right, well, whatever. You also have the idea of soloing. So this is this is kind of similar to Photoshop, in that you can isolate individual elements and just show them on screen. So that's the only thing that you're going to see is this one element is being soloed, or so it hides anything that's not selected. So you can select multiples, but they're not going to show up. And if they're all selected, then that's the same as not having any selected. And then finally, you can lock them so that you can prevent any values from being changed. That doesn't prevent keyframes from working. It just prevents you from editing them. So this is for you to stay organized. You have the notion of layer colors. So each of these, you have labels that you can color any particular content. By default, there are some default colors that are given. So red is generally for text layers. This peach is, I guess, yeah, for 3D lights. There's a pink for 3D cameras, but it's not important necessarily to know why they're colored, but that you have some, it looks like 12 to 15 colors that you can choose from to group different content just based on any system you like. By default, it will assign a new layer based on a default color. Then I guess you have the name of the layers. Notice that if you want to, you can go through and rename layers, but you don't do it by double clicking. Well, I suppose with lights you could. But if you double click most things, it's not going to behave like you expect with like you would expect in Premiere, where when you double click a project, it loads it in here. If you just single click on it, you're editing the name of that clip, and damn it, if I don't hate that it gives me an icon view when I want a list view. So when you just click on a media clip in Premiere, give you some room so you can see what I'm doing. So when you click on it and you click a second time, it shows the rename. You can name your clip. You can change the name of your clip. In Premiere, you can click on this as many times as you want, and it's not going to change the name of your clip. The reason why is that you actually have to hit the return key to be able to rename clips in After Effects, or that could be your enter key as well. So if you get frustrated and you're like, why the hell can't I name this? I keep clicking, and nothing's happening, or I double click and nothing happens, or double click and I get a layer instead of my composition. So just be aware that double clicking doesn't do what you expect it to do in Premiere. And to name things, you'll do that. There's this indicator here. It's called the shy indicator. What this does is this allows you to kind of clean up your workspace. If you know that you don't want to hide layers, well, but this is what it basically does. It temporarily hides them from view. So if you know that you're not working on these text layers and you're just working on this last one, large tool area, you can actually set the shy for these. So what happens is the little dude, this is a little dude's face, okay? Think 2 eyes and a nose. And if the head disappears, when you enable shy, it's going to hide all those layers, and all of the layers that the shy guy is removed disappear temporarily. They're still in the composition, they're just not visible. You have well, we will talk a little bit more about collapsing transformations and continuously rasterizing. You do have a quality, so you can do a draft quality, full quality sort of choice for any particular layer. You can say whether effects will be turned on or off for for each layer. You have the ability to enable motion blur, which we will talk extensively about inside of After Effects. It has a lot to do with 2D animation. Making it look natural is what motion blur does best. This is how you make effects look like they were shot on film. 3D layers we'll talk about in depth when we get to 3D animations. Adjustment layers, if you just want the effects applied to this layer to be applied to everything underneath it, you can set that to an adjustment layer for that. Then there's a parenting notion. We will talk about this next week, I believe. And then you have a couple more buttons that I want to point out. You have toggle switches, where you can, when you click it, you actually change this whole half of the layer from these individual buttons to these drop downs. You have a mode, you have a track mat, and the parent is still there. So the mode is actually the blend mode from what we talked about with Premiere. Is you have blend modes, and they are, again, substantially the same. Up to this point, they're the same exactly as Photoshop and Premiere. The ones that After Effects adds are some stencil, silhouettes, and then alpha. Because they're alpha channel related, that's why they're here in After Effects and not in Premiere or in Photoshop. So you have the notion of a track mat. We will talk about track mats later as well. Okay? You have this little weird curly Q item. This is called the pick whip. Anybody know what the pick whip does? Other than Evan? Anybody other than Evan know what the pick whip does? Yeah, Catherine.
Licking layers.
Correct. Yeah, you can take this and actually basically that has to do with this drop down that's next to it, is that this drop down actually lists all of the other layers except for the one that you're currently on in that composition. And you can have this layer follow the other layers. So if you're moving, this is how you group things together in terms of animating them as a unit. You know, the other way is to pre-compose it, but the simple way here is to basically parent one layer to another and then animate just the one layer, and then all of the child layers that are parented to that one will move with it or will be affected by the effects and the keyframes that you apply to that parent. Okay. You don't just have to parent layers. You can actually parent individual attributes. We haven't even gotten to kind of the true, touching the monolith here, but for purposes of all of these, I wanted to just introduce you to this. Now, to bookend this, you have the notion of effects, frame blending, motion blur, and 3D layers. Well, these are all, you'll notice that you do have buttons up here. So you do have a button for draft 3D, meaning that for 3D layers, it will kind of do a low res version of it. You have frame blending, which you can turn on for any layers that have frame blending enabled, which is usually media layers. So you'll see it on media layers like video files, but not for non-video content. And then you have motion blur, which is mostly available for anything that is visible on screen. So these lights are not actually visible, so they don't get a motion blur, and the camera is not visible because that's what you're using to see with. So it doesn't have motion blur either. You set motion blur on different layers to simulate camera movement, the smearing of that you get from fast camera movement, and the fact that the shutter time, the shutter speed of your video is set a certain way can actually make it so that these animated pieces look like they were in the video when it was shot. Okay, all right. Last here is the graph editor. We will talk at length about this. Right now, I want suffice it to say that the graph editor is definitely something that you can spend a lot of time with. Here, as it turns out, I don't have any keyframes on any of this because I was doing a 3D track and applied it. So there's no keyframes to speak of inside of this particular project. Okay.
What are the first two
Oops.
symbols again? Sorry, after the name of the layer.
So this one's called shy.
Okay.
Okay, that's the shy guy.
Which does what?
Okay, and then this one is actually called, it has two functions. This one will continuously rasterize vector layers, meaning that if you put an Adobe Illustrator or an SVG or some other kind of vector graphic into your composition, the minute that you import it, it will render it as pixels. But and if you then resize it, it's going to render it as it was first imported. So it's going to look very pixelated and blurry, and you'd be like, what the hell, man, this is a vector. So the way you do it is for vector graphics, you would select that, and we'll get to this. We'll actually talk about bringing in some things from vectors for shapes, and so we'll have that opportunity. The other part of this is when you pre-compose and you have compositions inside of other compositions, you can do things like collapsing transformations, which is a particular way to address some problems of pre-composing. There's this points to the big problem with After Effects from a high level is that it evolved into the tool that we're using now. It was not created from whole cloth like this. So lots of these features have been kind of added over time. Pre-composing had a certain function and it was only in 2D. And then when you started working with 3D animations, pre-composing started causing problems. And so collapsing transformations, basically, if you have 3D layers inside of 3D, if you have a 3D comp inside of a 3D comp, are you working from the same coordinate space? That's one situation where collapsing transformations can help. We'll talk about it. Don't worry about it. I'll show you an example of that as we get to it. Okay, but yeah, those are the first two after this. Okay, taking way too long, but all good questions. All right, this is my second slide about why you should use dynamic link. There are some pros to it. You know, you can, and what I'm speaking of is the ability to take a clip, right, and go over here and Adobe Dynamic Link it to replace with After Effects composition. What it will do is it will take this clip and it will render it to an AEP project, and it's going to create a comp inside of that project, and it's going to, you know, and it'll then import that that After Effects project into Premiere and then replace the composition in your timeline. So it does all of that kind of automatically. So that is, it does have some benefits. I will not deny that there are benefits. So it's super handy and convenient. One click does a lot. It changes to your After Effects project will show immediately in Premiere. So if you go and do a tweak inside of your project, you have both apps open, and you tweak something in After Effects, you can go back to Premiere, and the change will propagate into Premiere, and you'll see your changes immediately. Templating capability inside of After Effects, which they've been kind of beefing this up, allows semi-automatic things like lower thirds and other titling things where you can do it once. You can design it once, put placeholder text in there, template that placeholder text, and then those become fields that you can edit inside of Premiere. That is a very useful feature that I'm almost willing to go along with, right? The cons, though, are, I will repeat a lot of this, where this was the first time I talked about why you don't do dynamic link between Premiere and Adobe Audition. Here's the reasons why you don't want to do it between Adobe Audition or between Premiere and After Effects. Again, it only works if they're the same exact version. If you have any mismatch there, dynamic linking is broken. If the linkage does get broken, it can really be a problem getting it to work again. And it does slow your editor down since the composition is not rendered out. So the workflow that I generally ascribe to is I'd work in After Effects, I would render out what I was working on, and then I would have that file name linked inside of the Premiere Pro project, and then it would automatically update at that point. Because that's basically what it's doing for you. It's just doing it dynamically as opposed to doing it intentionally. So part of it is you lazy editors want convenience, and there's a price for that convenience, and the price is that you're counting on Adobe getting it exactly right all the time, and they don't, and then you're like up where without a paddle, and there you go, you're fair game. Important keyboard differences that I wanted to kind of call out here. In Premiere, your arrow keys can move your playhead on a timeline. In After Effects, you do not want to do that. In After Effects, when you do that in After Effects, you actually move whatever your current selected layer, you're moving it left and right inside of the composition. This is a hard one. This one will hurt you. You're gonna hammer on the right key going, why isn't the playhead moving? And then suddenly you're like, why is my stuff 10 pixels off? And that's why, is because you were moving something in your composition. So page up and page down, move the playhead for After Effects. Premiere, enter. When you hit enter, it opens and executes something. In After Effects, when you hit enter, it renames things. Premiere, when you hit minus and equals or plus, it zooms in and out. With After Effects, it's comma and period. Get used to it. Premiere keyboard can be remapped, and I think that they've actually changed this. It used to be After Effects keyboards were pretty much what it was. It might be that they have come to their senses, but they really hadn't. Yeah, so they're doing better. So you can tell that it's like when you say, hey, I want to look at keyboard shortcuts, and they send you to the web, you're off in the weeds. So this is their, yeah, it looks like it's still the same. You do have some limited capabilities, but it's nothing like Premiere. Premiere, you can basically remap anything to any other key. In After Effects, you're kind of like, nope, these are the keys that you got, and you work them the way that they're set up. And so, yeah. It's kind of a bummer, but it's what it is. Let's get through this, and we're almost there. So, yeah, pretty much what it is. Okay, so, and we've been starting to talk through this, so we're almost to the finish line. Let's get a couple more minutes in, and then we'll wrap. So, creating a new composition we've talked about. Getting organized. So you can treat this space exactly the same way that you treat a project in Premiere. You have folders. You can call them bins if you want. That's okay with me. I won't fault you. But you have the ability to say footage, or if you have maybe you have stills. You have some. Maybe you have some still images. Maybe you have some vector graphics. I keep creating this in the wrong folders, but that's fine. So you might have vector images, still images, and moving footage. You could have sounds. You might actually have, maybe client logos, maybe, whatever. It can be, there's all kinds of, you could have elements in here. Say you go out and you buy or you license a bunch of visual effects elements and you want to use them in the project. Well, you could keep them in a folder that says, here's my VFX elements. And then you have a folder just for that. Okay, so staying organized inside of Premiere or staying organized inside of After Effects is substantially similar to staying organized inside of Premiere. It is exactly, for all intents and purposes, it's exactly the same. Any changes you make inside of After Effects project is only pertains to the project. You're not changing the names of files on your disk. You're not changing the names of folders on your disk. You're just changing that all inside of the project itself. So the visibility of all of this is all there. So yeah, the other part of this, a couple more things that I've neglected to mention is, you do have the ability to create a new composition. Actually, that's down here. Nope. Oh, composition. Yeah. So new composition, Command or Control N. You also have the ability right here on this little film strip icon to create a composition as well. So you have the full ability to do your to set that up. Notice that it kept the same settings that I used last time. So the duration, the frame rate, that'll save. If it was any other systems than these school systems where when you shut them off, they wipe the next time you boot them, these settings would persist the next time you open this project. We can talk about, we won't talk about this today. And there are some interesting notions in terms of motion blur. You do have the ability to switch how it behaves, so you can make it behave more like a slow shutter or a fast shutter. You have the ability here. You also have the ability for motion blur, how to affect how many oversamples it puts on screen so that to make that blur more smooth. And that's about it. I think this is the majority of what I wanted to kind of get through tonight in terms of getting you to start to appreciate what we have going on here. When you want to, the last thing is this project settings. You do have the ability to change certain project settings, and this is available up here as well, where you can. Maybe it's under project settings. Well, I'm flailing. I'm running out of steam, guys. Yeah. All right. Forget it. Not today. I'll find it. I'll find it tomorrow. But you click on the ABPC, and that actually corresponds to, you have the ability to create very high dynamic range compositions, ones that could be rendered to film, actual film stock, and basically make and you can work compositions in a way that is very cinematic and true to how film would, if you were working in film, how that would look. So there is the ability to work with a deeper bit depth for, you'll sometimes find that some online tutorials require you to change your bit depth to 32 bits because you're going to do some crazy stuff. You have the ability to work in different color spaces, which again should be familiar from Photoshop for some of you. You have the ability to linearize so if you have a working space, so say you want to do sRGB or HD Rec 709, which is a common broadcast color space for HD TV. You can also work in linear color spaces and other stuff, which is, this starts to head down the welcome to the rabbit hole that has no bottom. So, but project settings, generally speaking, you will not need to mess with this too much. You have the ability, you're welcome to explore it all you like and get yourself into trouble. But that is After Effects in a very, very short period of time. There's plenty more here. And in terms of what else did I have? I had something else, didn't I? Render queue. Yeah, the render queue. So I can do this in 5 minutes. Sure, I can. When time comes to export content, you got to select your, same sort of deal. You're going to select your comp either here or in the project, and you're going to come over here to export, add to render queue. Notice that the first one on the list is Adobe Media Encoder. The next one is add to render queue. And the render queue is very interesting in that it looks very similar in a lot of ways to how you set render settings inside of Adobe Media Encoder. But you'll have the composition will show up here. It's going to show you render settings and output modules and so generally speaking, the best settings, if you know that's what you want to see a final output, that's what best settings is. I don't normally need to change that. That's the default. The other part of this that does change pretty quickly is this one where there's a variety of presets here. Notice that the format for lossless is QuickTime, as a QuickTime format with an animation codec. Animation is very high fidelity, but it is very, very big and it's very, very slow. Meaning that playing animation back in an editor, either in Premiere or other places, is not easy for a computer to do. It might be possible these days for these computers to play animation in Premiere and not drop frames. Didn't used to be that way. But this is like very much like almost it's not quite uncompressed, but it is very, very, it's very light compression. It is lossless, meaning that every pixel that you render is when you read it back out, it is exactly the same as the pixels that you stored when you rendered it. Okay, so that's lossless. But generally speaking, if you wanted to change this to something like working in, this hasn't changed. This is actually what it was last year when I last did this. Is the only export format that is kind of easy for you guys to comprehend right now is the QuickTime format. There are other formats that you can do where you have ping sequence, JPEG sequence, TIFFs and Targas, and then you get into these things. OpenEXR and DPX are areas that I'm not going to go into, but these are areas where professional VFX live in terms of passing work between different departments. So if you want to render something as high fidelity as you possibly can, you can use DPX Cineons or OpenEXR, and it will export that in as high fidelity as actual film stock. In fact, it theoretically exceeds what film stock can do in terms of what you can render. So film stock is considered lossy compared to these film formats. The downside is that, especially with DPX, trying to render to DPX is something of a black art because you have to know, the receiver and the sender both have to know exactly the settings that were done for that DPX sequence in order for it to be usable from one to the other. If there's any change or any miscommunication or misunderstanding between all of the settings, when it comes to be imported, it's going to look like garbage. Okay, so that is some of that was handled with when they went to OpenEXR, but it is still it's still you got to be careful with it, and not every software knows what to do with OpenEXR. But this is what Lucasfilm uses. This is what Pixar uses. So these are well-defined formats now for VFX work. And Lucas was all about creating OpenEXR. He was sick of DPX, and so that was what spearheaded this. Okay, So the thing about rendering out of After Effects is these days, the best way to render your work for continued, fun and profit is either render it out using QuickTime and then choose under format options, choose a codec like ProRes, DNX HD, or GoPro Cineform like we did in the first week, so that you have a nice intermediate format that will be easily imported into Premiere to continue working. Or you can, you could send this to an H.264 output. That is an option as well. You also have you have DV or NTSC, and I'll publicly shame you if you try. And then, so you have all of the QuickTime codecs available to you on your computer. Generally speaking, for most of your class stuff, you'll probably want to just send your compositions to render to the Adobe Media Encoder queue instead, and just treat them like a media clip out of Premiere, a media export like Premiere. You can do that to a high bitrate H.264 or some other thing like that, and save it off, and then import it into Premiere, and you're good to go. Okay, that is the long and the short of how the interface for Adobe After Effects works for you guys. There is, this is it's a whole new world, and welcome to, for some of you, this might be the start of a beautiful friendship. For others of you, this is going to be the start of a nightmare. So yeah, and I can't tell you right now which one it's going to be for you. But generally speaking, there should come a time where it starts to feel a little more like you know what you're doing, and that is where you will start to feel like productivity is possible for you. All right, you guys have a great week. I know I'm behind on grading, so I will be. I was sick last week. I'm now feeling better, and so I will be catching up with that. If you haven't brought up your USB drive, please do so now, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you.